Jamie, you've done a million interviews, okay? And I'd kind of like this one to be a little bit different, maybe even different than anything I've ever done on this show. But I know you're a master storyteller. Basically, we're going to try to share the stories of your life and the learnings that you had along the way. And I know it's going to be a lot of fun for me because I've been a part of at least a good deal of your business career. I know your father was a stockbroker, and we've talked a little bit about him, but I've never really heard you talk a lot about your mother. Could you tell us a story about your mom and a leadership lesson that you picked up from her?
Yeah. I'll do both a little bit. My parents died in 2016. And if you'd asked me before that about, credit for what you did and how you grew and stuff like that, I probably didn't talk about it a lot. But now I'm looking back and you realize that very fundamental values you have, come from them. And the values were pretty basic. And I call them Greek, but they probably were just values that a lot of, folks have. One is you do the best you can. And whatever you do the best you can. It wasn't about how you did. It was simply that did you give it your best? The second was you treat everyone well. Like, if you mistreated anyone, like a waiter or a taxi cab driver, that was unacceptable. And as a codicil to that is you didn't allow other people to be bullies, which sometimes got you in trouble a little bit. And the third is do something with your life, but it was about purpose. So my dad was a stockbroker, but he was much more interested in philosophy than being a stockbroker. And the purpose could be, so my older brother became a physicist, a real physicist, MIT, University of Chicago, Niels Bohr Institute. My twin brother became an educator, but it was doing something with purpose. Draw your Picasso and make the world a better place through that purpose. And you could be art, it could be science, it could be teaching, it could be being a parent. It wasn't anything than just do it well and have a purpose. And they were pretty strict about that. Both of them. My mom was a Spartan. And when I say that, I really mean that. I mean, she was a beautiful woman, but she was pretty tough. Like I saw her, the only time I saw her cry was when JF Kennedy got killed. And I got home that day and she was crying. Other than that, not even when we told her she had pancreatic cancer or, and she said, I've had a great life. And so she was, I would say, kind of stoic. She became very early on a women's liber. And she also went back to college when I went to college. So she hadn't finished college. She'd gone for a year or two at Brooklyn College or something like that, and then stopped to be a mother. But she always did things like, I'll tell you a quick little story about my mother. We must be 12 or 13 years old, and my parents are having a glass of wine in the living room. And my father says to my mother something about, her name was Themis, which means justice in Greek, by the way. I believe the goddess of justice. And he used the word, you're acting hysterical. And I don't know if you remember those books about the second mystique or the second sex. And she said, I told you not to say that, Ted. He said, well, when you're acting hysterical, you're acting hysterical. And she said, I told you not to say that. And he said it one more time. And she walked up to him and took her wine in his face and left the room. And he was in shock. And the three boys, we've never seen anything like that. Not in my house. And now, of course, the three of us were like, the revolution has begun because he was the boss. Like just you, and it was like we're going to overthrow the king. And to his credit, when we all sat down for dinner a little bit later, he came back and said, "I just want you all to know your mom was right." So
that sounds like the Jamie Dimon I know today.
The other thing about my mother, you got to understand, my mother was a Freudian. So my father kind of was, but my father was more like us. Like what did they do? Blah, blah, blah. But she was like, why did they do it? So it's like, so you end up these conversations. I don't care why they did it. It's what they did. And so, but because of that, I read a lot of Freud before I finished college. I mean, I read almost all of it before I finished college, just to how people think. And of course, a lot of Freud was wrong, but it is a real insight into trying to figure out how the mind works.
Yeah. How much do you think that really helped you as you started working with people?
Quite a bit. I always try to be. I think both sides, trying to act and do something, but also try to figure out people and their motivations. There are all those EQ things you talk about. Are they real? Are they authentic? What motivates them? Why? Treating people respectfully. So yeah, I do think it helps in part of your life. You're always thinking, how the world works, but also how people work. And both, as you know, both those things can be very complicated. And we still spend most of our time trying to figure that stuff out.
How did the fact that your dad was in finance and was totally indoctrinated in that world, how did that impact, where you headed? And when you think about your dad, what was the biggest thing you learned from him that you took into the business world?
So of the three boys, I was the only one who took an interest in finance. I worked from the summer, basically like doing mailings and answering phones and stuff like that when I was 14 or 15. But I was interested. I always read the papers. I always read the business section. I read the sports section. I read the. So he nurtured that. He didn't make anyone do it. Like I said, my older brother became a physicist. My other brother, educator, which my parents enormously respected. But I was interested in that part of the world, and so he'd give me stuff to read. I remember reading a book that Merrill Lynch had done, like how to read an income statement and balance sheet. I read Graham and Dodd. There's a big, thick one, but there's a one called The Intelligent Investor. I probably read it when I was 15, and I bought my first stocks when I was about 14 or 15. And so that my interest was piqued. I wasn't heading to be a stockbroker. In fact, my father didn't want me to. His view, a lot of people like the grass is green on the other side. He didn't think it was what I should be doing or stuff like that. And I didn't head to be a stockbroker. But yeah, of course, it nurtured my interest. And, I wrote a couple of papers in college about business and stuff like that. So I was interested. But the interest was more about building something great. I would read the stories about companies that had really done interesting stuff and built things and bought things and, made more employees and stuff like that. So yeah, it nurtured it. Gave me stuff to read. I remember a very humbling thing. He came home one day, a couple of times. You remember Yum Brands. So take a business you think you would understand, like a restaurant, and you can understand what the profits are, and that you actually eat there, as opposed to like chips, which is hard for a kid. But he would take, and back then annual reports were much shorter, and he would rip out the page that had the price, and he'd say, "Read this thing, and tell me you would pay for it." And for anyone out there, I don't care how smart you are or how good I think you are, you will be humbled by that exercise. And so it really becomes a discipline about what makes you think about things and how you think about values
that's so cool. That's so great. And so you grow up in this rough and tumble neighborhood. You get into the street fights, and here you end up going to Harvard. Okay, I don't really see you as a Harvard guy. I know you could definitely do well there, but that had to be a different kind of place for you.
So I went to Tufts University. I was one of those deferred admits. So you're going to go, but back then you had to work for 2 years. I worked at a consulting company that doesn't exist anymore, and I did well at school, and I didn't go in very nervous like that. But my wife tells the story, because I met my wife in the second year there, as you know, that I was the guy in the class, like wearing the leather jacket, a t-shirt, and jeans. Not prep, and I hadn't gone to Harvard undergrad or Yale or Princeton or, a lot of that. But I loved it because the Socratic method, for those who don't know, you sit in a class with 80 people, you read cases, and then the real world is messy. So this is not like theory anymore. Even when they talk about capital markets, it isn't like, supply demand curves. It's like, why do things trade this way? And why do people do those things? And why do so many business ventures succeed and so many fail? But you learn that and even today, if you and I went there and sat through a good case, as your friend Andy Pearson taught, and I went there when he was there, you would learn a lot from listening to other people. And that is I still do that. You sit around the table, why, what, when. You went to other companies or things. And so I liked it. I wasn't, people were afraid of public speaking, had a hard time. People who weren't a little proficient in numbers might have had a hard time. But I kind of loved it. Made some great friends there, who I still speak to. Steve Burke.
Yeah.
My wife wasn't that happy with it. It made some people kind of nervous. But when you settle in, once you see the people, you get to know them, and having fun every day. It's pretty good.
So you meet your wife, Judy, at Harvard. When was that aha moment you knew that she was the one?
So she was introduced to us by a friend, Mandel, who you may actually have met at one point along the way. And she pointed out to me, and Judy was very pretty, very smart, and I was interested, intrigued right off the bat. She had asked to meet me, and she thought I was just, I don't know, kind of cool or something like that. She talked about wearing sunglasses and T-shirts, and I really, really wear sunglasses. I'm not quite sure what she was talking about, but I called up her house. She lived with like 6 other women. One of them was the president of the finance club. I was a vice president of the finance club, and I was speaking to her about some event we were doing, and then Judy got on the phone and said, "Hey, do you want to play some tennis?" I said, "Well, sure." We hit it off right away. She says went to have a malted or shake or whatever that day. She says I made her pay, which I don't think is true. And then she had a boyfriend, by the way. He wasn't at Harvard Business School, but we started seeing each other almost every day for dinner after that, and that was that story.
Fantastic. And how long you been married now?
Been married 43, 42 years.
What would you say are the biggest learnings you've had on how to make a marriage work for that length of time and have the success you guys have had as partners?
I mean, when you give advice in this, that you learn a lot. You just do it well, like all the time. And so I'll tell you some of the things I think we did well. First of all, we were devoted to each other and kids. So we wanted to have kids, we wanted to have a family. She had a professional career, but for anyone out there, the younger people who listen to this, that's when you have a job and kids and you're still like 28 years old, that's when you're kind of burning the candle at both ends. And now you have a real obligations to family, your wife, your kids, and stuff like that. And I always tell people, so the lessons, and I didn't always do these right, is you need to make sure that you take care of your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, your friends, your family. It doesn't happen automatically. And you and I have seen a lot of people professionally in any profession, and maybe not in profession, they start to neglect that stuff. And it's bad. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your family. You end up getting divorced. So it takes time and it takes attention. And that's probably the most important thing. I think we never did this, but I think it's very smart I was working so hard that we took family vacations. My wife and I very rarely took a vacation, just the two of us, which is now like a standard thing. People now there's a name for it.